Hey everybody, Ron Bielefeld, Whistling Wings Photography. Welcome to another video. This is going to be my 6th video. Can't believe I said 6th without stuttering, because I'm usually really bad at words like that. In my series on getting better bird in flight images. And this video is going to be about techniques. And when I say techniques, I mean things like hand holding versus using a gimbal head on a tripod, stuff like that. And I'm really excited about this video because I have a really good friend of mine with me today. He's right here. Introduce yourself, Mike.
Hi, I'm Mike Cohen, South Florida.
Yeah,
good friend of Ron's.
Yeah, and not just a friend of mine, but a very, very accomplished, award-winning wildlife photographer. So I'm super excited to have him here. So if you are interested in knowing more about the techniques we use to shoot birds in flight, stay tuned. All right, so like I said in the introduction, we're going to be talking about techniques for shooting birds in flight this morning. And that has to do with whether you're going to hand hold, whether you're going to use a tripod with a gimbal head, monopod with a monopod head, whatever. And like a lot of things with wildlife photography, bird photography specifically, is it can be a real personal thing about what works best for you. But Mike and I want to point out some things this morning, and that's really going to be the focus of this. Some of the advantages and limitations of certain techniques for shooting birds in flight. So the first thing I think we should talk about, Mike, is using a tripod and a gimbal head. Sure. Because that's what a lot of people do when they shoot birds, when they shoot wildlife, when they shoot in general, any type of action. People are bringing out their tripods and they're putting their rig, like I have right here, on a gimbal head. This happens to be a side mount gimbal head, and there's lots of different kinds of gimbal heads. Like, I'll give you, a couple other ones here. These are, this is a side, yeah, exactly, right? And that's part of the point I want to make today, too. We want to make, this is a sidekick type mount. There are the platform, I call it like a platform mount. A lot of people like that because it's not just going to fall off. Right. Something like this, if you don't get this tight, it's going to, or this one here is going to, yeah, because it goes like this. So it's a sidekick type too, and it'll just fall off if you get this wrong, right? If you don't get your plate in there. But one of the things that I think we should talk about, Mike, is the fact that, especially like this, and these things are big and heavy all by themselves. And I like to be kind of lean and mean when I shoot. And so I don't, even this tripod, it's not a huge tripod, but it's pretty big. And so you put something like this on here, and then you put your, you've got your 600 and A1 there, and you put that on, pretty soon this thing's weighing, 20 some pounds or something like that.
Plus, I think it really restricts your mobility. So you're more likely to shoot from wherever the tripod is, rather than go 100 yards this way or lean down a foot or up a foot. If you try to move it, you're missing the action during that period of time. So it's restrictive in that sense. It does have its values too, which we'll cover. Yeah,
but that's one of the big problems I have with using tripods and gimbal heads. You don't have to use, I see so many people for birds in flight. Again, remember, we're talking about birds in flight here. Right. There's motion involved in birds in flight, movements involved, shaking involved. You don't need a big, huge, strong tripod and gimbal head or ball head, like if you were shooting landscapes where everything, shooting slow shutter speeds, all this kind of stuff. You don't need that. This is the kind of stuff Mike and I use. If we're going to use a tripod, and sometimes you do have to use tripods for birds in flight. If you shoot my kingfisher from the blinds, you have to have it on a tripod because it has to be up and the lens has to be sticking out of the blind at all times. But if you're shooting birds in flight, you don't need, it's not for stability. It's to keep the weight off of your hands and arms and stuff like that. because so you don't need this huge, heavy rig for birds in flight. Mike and I think we both agree we love this head too now. This is kind of a gimbal head, but it's not your prototypical type gimbal head. It's called a flex shooter, and it's actually a ball head and a gimbal head in one, but it is a gimbal head for birds in flight. And it's a ball that has a spring-loaded ball within a ball.
Right.
And so you can get all of the axes of movement you would by doing this. Right? You can shoot in every axis with this little rig here that weighs a couple pounds versus something big like this. And you can still balance your rig. So you can, everything is loose here and it's not flopping around. That's the big advantage of using a gimbal head versus a ball head where you have to have things tight to keep things from flopping all over the place. Gimbal heads for action, that's why you use them. This will do the same thing. This little knob right here loosens the action, but you can move in all axes here, but when you let go, it stays right there.
I particularly like that one because I travel a lot, or I used to before the pandemic.
Yeah, we all did.
And I could just take that versus having to take two, a ball head and a gimbal. And it works very well.
Yeah, and I love it when I have to use a tripod and some sort of a head. Most of the time, I hate to even do that. And that's what we'll talk about next, because as I've been trying to do with these videos, it's hard, as you know, because I like to talk a lot, to keep these videos relatively short. But let's talk about hand holding, because it is such a versatile way, and I think the best way to do it, this thing is being a pain, to do it when you can. I'm gonna go ahead and take this off of here. The gimbal head in the tripod, if you're up against the boat like this, what if the bird comes from way over here and you're having to sit in a seat? Now we're on a boat today, but even if you're on the ground, you can only go so far. When you're hand holding, obviously, it doesn't matter where things are coming from. You can stand up, you can pivot around, you can shoot any direction instantly. You can get low, like Mike mentioned earlier. What if you come up on a subject, so it's a shorebird or something, or a wading bird on the beach, and you're waiting for it to fly, but I don't want to be towering over that thing. I want to get down low. Well, now what are you going to do?
There could be a stick right here, and all you have to do is move a foot this way and move the stick out of the way, or behind the bird, or coming out of its head. Or
if you're using a tripod and a gimbal head, you got to shorten everything up and put your legs way out to the side.
Bird's gone by
and the bird's gone. You missed a shot. And so hand holding obviously is the most versatile way to go. Now, as far as how to hand hold, this is not a real heavy rig here. This is a 100 to 500 on a Canon R5. Mike's got something. Actually, that lens probably doesn't weigh too much more than this one, but
a little,
a little bit. Is that your 600? Is that
it's a 600.
Yeah, that's a 600 f4 on his A1, I believe, Sony A1. And there's different ways that not only can you set these things up, but hand holding, you can do it different ways. And again, it can be a personal preference. I like to have the foot, which is always on these longer lenses, for me anyway, up and out of the way, because almost all other lenses, and this can include these longer telephoto lenses, I like to have my hand pretty far out on the lens because it gives me more stability when I'm panning, or if I'm stopping and shooting something perched and getting ready for a bird to take off to get a bird in flight shot. It's just more stable for me. Now, I believe, Mike, you like to do things a little bit differently than I do.
It's more a matter, I agree that having your hand out further does provide stability. So sometimes I'll move it out there, but I tend to rest the front of the foot on my hand. And for me, I don't always do it, but I like to tuck my elbow in and for additional stability. And I can't do that when I'm out there.
Right.
So for me, I'm used to it.
It's whatever is comfortable for you. But if you're having some issues, stability-wise or something, what we're getting at here is try some different things. There's no perfectly right or wrong way to do these things. You see so many people talking about, well, I do it this way and it's better. In the end, it comes down to what works best for you. If you're having troubles, change something, and it may just be moving your hand to a different position on the lens or whatever. Now, hand holding in general is something that with these heavier, I don't consider this heavy. Some people obviously will consider even a 100 to 500 heavy.
Most people can't do what you're doing and holding the camera.
Right, like this.
Like it's a toy.
But especially the 600, f4s, the 400 2.8s, the 500 f4s, they're very popular with birds in flight photography. They're heavy. If you really want to be able to handhold, I think you can do it. We've had this discussion many times, and most people say it's just too heavy. I can't do it. Well, go ahead, Mike.
Right,
Tell me.
So a couple of things. I wanted to make a point with it. We're shooting at fast shutter speeds, so stability it's not like you're shooting at 1/60th of a second or 100th, unless you're going for blurs or something where you need the stability of a tripod. You're shooting at least 1/1600th of a second, and that's like the slowest you'd probably be wanting to shoot. So I've taught a lot of people. I teach birds in flight, and I've taught some pretty small people who use some pretty large, heavy lenses and cameras, and it really comes down to how quickly you can acquire your target. So if I see something a mile away and I'm holding it, waiting, anybody's going to be tired by the time it gets there. But if you're confident you can acquire your target, you can not waste that energy. Wait till the subject becomes into or close to your target zone where you want it to be, where you're hoping it will go, and then acquire it. So literally done. Pretty much everybody can do that if they can develop the skill of acquiring the target. Nobody does it better than you.
Well, I don't know about that.
Acquiring better than I do, but it's a hard skill to acquire with a long lens. And let me just touch on that for a second.
Yep.
A little technique that has helped a lot of people is if you use this as a rifle and you either sight along the top or you sight along the bottom, and don't try to find the target with your eye in the viewfinder. You're finding the target like this, and you're transitioning to the viewfinder, and you'll develop a sense of whether you tend to be high, low, to the left, and you'll adjust for that.
Yeah, and different camera bodies line up differently, and different lenses kind of line up differently. So the more you practice, I've already done a video on practice and how important practice is for birds in flight. This is a part of it. And sometimes people too will keep both eyes open when they're first getting and trying to track a bird, and then, like you say, transitioning. If you've ever shot skeet or trap, this is gun sports now. Right. People that have done that tend to be really good at picking up how to get on a bird and finding it in the viewfinder really, really quickly. But like Mike said, it's really important to be able to find the bird quickly, because that limits the amount of time you have to hold these heavy things up. I get tired. I've been doing this for a long, long time. I'm not, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and I'm dating myself now, I know, but I'm not weak, but I'm not super strong either. I will get tired, even with this. If I have to sit here and hold it, everybody gets tired. It's just a second a lot of times that you have to hold it up. Just 1 second, that's it. Most people, like Mike said, can do that. And I think if you practice, you will get stronger too. I mean, if you do this enough, it's not like you're going to not get stronger and get more capable, and then you will be able to actually hold it up longer when you need to, because sometimes the action does last a little bit. But you'll find, if you give it a chance, that hand holding is going to open up. If you're not doing it already, it can be done. It can be done by most people, unless you have a physical disability or something like a bad shoulder or whatever, and we'll talk about that in a minute. A way to get around that. That's why I'm wearing this goofy looking harness, I guess. We'll talk about that, but you will get better at it. You'll get stronger, and you'll find that it's going to open up, if you're not already doing it, it's going to open up a whole new realm of getting shots of birds in flight that you couldn't get before, because you're just too hampered by all this gadgetry. If you have to hike, there's nothing better than to not have to worry about taking all this stuff with you if you got to hike up the Pyrenees or something like that to get to where you want to go and shoot. So I think hand holding is really the way that I recommend people try to do birds in flight if they can do it. And I think if you really give it an effort, you'll be able to do it. The thing that I just mentioned about if you can't physically do it because you have an injury or whatever, there is a method of using, this is simply a military flagpole harness that the military uses for parades, for the flag holder out in front of the parade. And it has obviously 2 straps over your shoulders, and it has a little pocket right here. And what you can do is you can put a monopod on your big heavy lens. This is my 600 f4, much heavier than Mike's. This is a Mark II Canon. And then you can just put you can extend the smallest part of the monopod down, and it goes in this pocket. And just like before, you can get a head on here. This is a gimbal head, actually, not a typical monopod head. And just like before, when we were talking about gimbal heads on a tripod, the whole point is that it will balance. It will balance, and it won't just flop around. Some monopod heads you have to tighten and loosen to keep it from flopping around, and this one you don't have to do that. This is the Wimberley mono gimbal head, and I love it. It's just this little bitty thing on the top. But what this does is takes all of the weight off your hands and arms, puts it on your shoulders, and so now it's basically hand holding without hand holding. I can shoot with one finger, basically. And what's cool about this, it's just like hand holding because you can move any direction quickly. You can stand up without having to change the length of the monopod. You can sit down, you can even lay down. If I want to go over there, Mike says, hey, over here, Ron, got something great. I can just go. I don't have to do everything you have to do with a tripod. And it really takes, there's no weight on you can do this all day long. And if you want to move a great distance, you can just throw it over your shoulder, however you find comfortable. That didn't work real well, but there we go. I'm going to edit that. I will edit that so you don't see that, because all these things are perfect all the time. But you can just walk, and then when you get there, you just bring it. Now, I've got it with the knob on this side. Well, what if you like it, and you can shoot like this, you can shoot like this. Well, what if you're left-handed or whatever and like it on the other side? Well, you can do that too, without doing anything else. Just flip it around, flip your camera around, and now you've got the knob on this side, if that's the way you like it. So I like it. It's a real versatile system, and I use this when I shoot video a lot. And we're getting a tree coming in here. We're drifting. We're drifting. Every time you try to do a video, there's always something going on. But anyway, this is, I'll say one more thing about this. I like this kind of harness. You can get them with a plastic cup or a metal cup down here to hold your monopod, but I don't like those because if you notice here, if I lift this up, this stays in this pouch. This is a fabric pouch, it stays in. So if something's coming really high, you can just lift it and then come right back down and not have to worry about this popping out. If this is a metal or a plastic cup, that end's gonna come out of there, and then you're gonna bring it down and it's gonna end up going where you don't want it to go. So anyway, that's all I really wanted to say about this thing. But it is a great way to be able to handhold, in a way, heavy stuff that you couldn't do otherwise, and keep the mobility and flexibility of shooting heavy lenses for active subjects like birds in flight.
We're in a very secluded area with no wind, so the boat is not moving around, there's no wake or anything. You could use a tripod in these kind of conditions unless somebody moves or gets up or there's a wake. But typically on a boat, there's motion. And that motion with using a tripod gets transferred straight to your camera. There's nothing that you can do about it. With either the harness method or hand holding it, your body can absorb a lot of that motion and you can get a much stiller image than you would on a tripod. So one of the advantages on a boat in particular, the hand holding, is reducing the vibration of the environment.
And monopods are the same way. Anything that's on the on the bottom of the boat is going to transfer that motion. And just trying to get on the bird it's going to be like, forget it. You got a bird, out here this morning, we've got peregrine falcons migrating through the area and stuff like, get on that peregrine falcon as it's flying by and a boat just happens to come by, or Mike likes to do this to me. When I'm trying to shoot, he's doing this, making the boat move. And yeah, so like Mike said, anything tripod, monopod that's fixed to the bottom of the boat or is resting, that motion's transmitted. You can't do anything about it. Of course, you've got your legs and your arms and everything that you can mitigate that when you're hand holding. So that's another real big advantage of hand holding.
Now, one advantage of a tripod is we just saw a peregrine falcon that was sitting in a tree. It was there when we got there. It was there when we left. There's no way that you can, unless you're very lucky, that you're going to hold your camera hand holding it until that bird flies away to try to get the flight shot. That's a situation where a tripod will save the day. You can even have a remote.
Yeah.
You could line up on the bird, not from a boat because the boat's going to be moving, but if you were on land, you could have a remote and just be watching and fire the camera once the...
Here we go. Tree's getting in my face,
once the birds... So that's an advantage of a tripod, I think.
Yeah, and the harness is kind of the same way. You can just sit there and, there's no arm, strain or anything. You just sit there and sit there and sit there and sit there until the bird flies. And that happens a lot. I mean, we're talking about birds in flight here, but that includes takeoff shots, landing shots. Sometimes when people are doing the kingfisher, as you know, Mike, they'll pre-focus on the perch where the bird's going to fly into. And again, if you're going to sit there and do this forever, you can't. You just on a tripod, put it there, and that's where the remote comes in. A remote trigger is nice because you just sit there then and cheat. I call it cheating. Here comes the bird, as it comes in, and you get the shot of the bird landing. That's still a bird in flight shot. And so, it's all about these different techniques. And again, it's all about you going out, practicing, figuring out what works best for you. You should be able to do all of this. You should be able to use a gimbal head, a monopod, handhold, because you know what that does? It basically builds a situation where no matter what scenario you find yourself in to shoot birds in flight all around the world, you could probably adapt to just about anything. If I need to use a tripod, you get there and you're thinking you're going to handhold for birds in flight, but you get to some resort or some lodge or something, and they say, no, you got to use tripods.
Or when you're blind, you don't want the movement.
Right.
So if you're putting the camera down, that's an awful big movement that the bird might detect if you're having it lifted up where a tripod. And one tip that I'll pass along that might save everyone money is when you set your tripod up, push down on it before you put your camera on there, because
make sure the legs
there's so often that one leg is soft, it's partially not tight.
Yeah.
And everybody at one time or another has dropped their equipment, and that may prevent you from dropping.
And if you're setting up just a small camera body with a 50 millimeter, it may not matter. But you put that 600 with a, that's weight, and it's going to go.
And make sure the legs are spread, and push down on it, see if it's stable.
And like I was fighting with this thing earlier. These are tight, but they should be tight. You don't want them to be just flopping all over the place for that exact reason. So now you know that it's out where it needs to be. So I think, unless we forgot something, Mike, I think we've covered the basic techniques in the sense of hand holding, gimbal heads on tripods, monopods. Again, the more of all these different things you can do and do well, you're just going to be ready for any scenario that you find yourself in for shooting birds in flight, and hopefully get the shot of a lifetime. That's the thing. This is dynamic stuff, and when it's happening, and you don't want to be all tuckered out or whatever by using bad technique before things really get going. So, what else, Mike? Anything?
No, thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, thanks for watching. As usual, stay safe. I hope you have great light, get great images, and we'll see you soon.
Bye.